Hey there, guys. Alright, today we are back with some more overly sarcastic productions, and this time we are returning to their history summarized. Well, this one's history re-summarized. Egypt. Before we dive in, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. I would love to join the Discord and follow me over Twitch. And please do go check out the gaming channels here on YouTube. One channel is long form, just the streams, the 3 hour plus streams, gaming streams. And then the other gaming channel is more edited content, which is more, heavily edited content. Like I got my Tales of Kenzera playthrough edited on there. Like the first 10 streams of Fallout 4 edited on there, and a little bit of Elden Ring, and then there will be more longer Elden Ring videos coming to that channel in the coming weeks. I upload one video every 2 weeks over on that channel, but it may reduce to one a month depending on how much editing I'm able to get done in free time. So yeah. So with all that said, though, let's go ahead and re-summarize the history of Egypt. 14 minutes. So I'm gonna assume that we're maybe re-summarizing just like ancient Egypt, kingdoms Egypt. I don't know.
His Highness, King of the South and North, Ptolemy the Fifth. Oh, hey, didn't see you there. I was just, doing some light reading. Fun timing, actually, because after Napoleon stumbled onto this giant multilingual rock while on campaign in 1799, the Egyptian hieroglyphs were first translated from the matching Greek inscription exactly 200 years ago in 1822. Our ability to read the language opened the floodgates to modern Egyptology, and an archaeological discovery of that magnitude was only matched by Howard Carter finding the exquisitely preserved tomb of King Tut in 1922. But beyond the surface level aesthetics of fancy pictures, mummies, and giant D4s in the middle of the desert, what's really the story of ancient Egypt? Well, in celebration of Egyptology's double centennials, let's do some history. Now, before all this shiny modern scholarship,
Imagine, because there's that one woman who has been looking for Cleopatra's tomb, and it's seeming like in this past year she has really gotten really made some insane progress. Imagine if she had been able to do it in like 2022. That would have been fucking crazy, right? Just that kind of happenstance. I haven't seen any new updates recently. I wonder if I think she got approval for her dive off the coast of Egypt to survey some tomb that's underwater, or not tomb, some temple that's underwater. I wonder how that went. I wonder if they're still doing. Anyways,
ancient observers had written plenty of accounts, but despite the best attempts of Herodotus' Histories and Manetho's Egyptica, these were outside perspectives on ancient Egypt. Even the name comes from Greek, Aegyptos, whereas the original name is Kemet, referring to the fertile black soil along the banks of the Nile. As with the name, so too was all of ancient Egyptian society defined by this one water source. The Nile's annual floods deposited new layers of silt on the surrounding land, which made Egyptian farms the most abundant and consistent in the entire ancient Near East. Once grown, crops could easily travel by ship, and whomsoever had the biggest boat essentially had instant control of the entire river and the ability to govern everyone within line of sight of it. Which was everyone.
yeah.
With one easy source for water, food, trade, and power, that's the core criteria for civilization, so we're in business. Consequently, one quirk of Egyptian geography is that south, where the river started, is up, while north, where the river branches
Oh yeah, the Nile is weird.
into the delta and empties into the Mediterranean, is down. So Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt are charmingly reversed. Plus, each one
I hate that so much, but like I understand geographically, scientifically it makes sense, but to brain it doesn't.
comes with a neat crown. Fine on their own, but better together as demonstrated by Narmer, who unified the crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt both figuratively and literally. The man smushed the crowns together, becoming the first proper king of Egypt. We know this from King List, recorded later on, where he's referred to as Menes, which we used to think was a different person, but he's probably the same. And we also have what's called the Narmer palette, an artistic depiction of Narmer unifying Egypt. It's not quite clear where strict history ends and legend begins, but it vividly and kinda brutally tells the story as Egyptians understood it. And just as cool is how right out of the gate we have art in profile, the two crowns, hieroglyphic writing, and Falcon Boy Horus. By the third dynasty, things got even more on brand as the pharaohs started building pyramids. Working from earlier styles of big stone masonry and possibly inspired by Mesopotamian architecture, King Djoser built the first step pyramid in Egypt. After further experiments, one of which collapsed in on itself, oops, the kings of the fourth dynasty built the big fancy pyramids at Giza, which in their day would have been coated in white limestone and capped in gold. As a pure architectural achievement, the pyramids are spectacular, but the reality is that's a lot of work for a dead guy, so later dynasties shifted focus to building temples and other more usable structures. Ancient Egypt didn't emerge fully formed, but it's impressive what does appear at the start of dynastic history, with the pleasantly terrifying implication that several core aspects of Egyptian culture go back not just to the Old Kingdom, but even before Narmer. I should specify, the term Old Kingdom, along with Middle and New Kingdom, are modern conventions to distinguish periods of dynastic continuity and general stability with the intermediate periods, where something or other goes wrong. The first intermediate period
That's one way to put it.
began at the tail end of the 6th dynasty, where King Pepi II was several decades
Peppy? Peppy.
into his reign and appeared to be going senile. So in the absence of central authority, nomarchs in charge of the provinces gobbled up power for themselves and even established their own local dynasties. Though they paid lip service to the kings in Heracleopolis and Thebes, as there were competing dynasties in different cities, the next 130 years was a provincial free-for-all until King Mentuhotep II up in Thebes conquered Lower Egypt to reunite North and South, booted out all the hereditary nomarchs and replaced them with new ones actually loyal to the king, and thus kicked off the Middle Kingdom. These next 3 centuries were pleasantly chill on the political front thanks to Mentuhotep's reforms, so the main development was cultural as literature got more popular and accessible. In the Old Kingdom, spells to be used by the pharaohs in the afterlife were inscribed on the walls and sarcophagi of pyramids, while in the intermediary period that expanded to include coffin
99% of the afterlife belongs to 1% of the population. Oh, just like the money of today.
texts, so that high-ranking officials outside the royal circle could have some assistance on their way into the afterlife. By the later Middle Kingdom, this slow democratization of the afterlife culminated in the Book of the Dead, a personalized dummy's guide to the underworld filled with spells and stories to be buried alongside an individual. This requires a fairly robust conception of the afterlife, otherwise we're just casting spells in the dark, so it's likely this
I mean, sounds like a good time to me. Oh, bam, fireball.
literature developed in response to the growing cult of Osiris, the god of the dead. Beyond looking metaphorically down, Egypt also began looking outwards to their neighbors, as Senusret III conquered south along the Nile into Nubia while building trade relations with Mesopotamia. This was great until it slightly backfired, because when travelers, merchants, and migrants from the Levant came to settle in Lower Egypt in the latter decades of the Middle Kingdom, they realized that the 13th dynasty's authority wasn't all that strong and didn't extend very far beyond the capital city of Ishtawi. So in the absence of any meaningful resistance, some Canaanites declared a new dynasty, set up a new capital at Avaris, and started ruling Lower Egypt. Apparently, it was that easy, because about a century later, another Asiatic group called the Hyksos did the exact same thing.
You know, one time it could be a accident. A second time, now we're running into a problem here, Egypt.
Pharaohs up in Thebes surely weren't thrilled, but they couldn't even handle a local mini-dynasty at Abydos, so when the Hyksos eventually rolled into Thebes around 1580, they were powerless to stop it. They almost had all of Egypt too, until a dynastic dispute back down in Avaris forced them to regroup, which gave the new 17th dynasty in Thebes time to rebuild and launch a counterattack. The first two kings of the war died on campaign, but the third guy made it work, fully reuniting Egypt under Theban authority and beginning the New Kingdom period. His first order of business was stopping that whole mess from happening again, so he conquered into the Levant to smack them around a little and make sure they didn't get ideas, as well as reconquering into Nubia to open the gold mines back up. Of course, there's more ways to get cash than ripping it out of the ground or stealing its spear points. There's the polite method of selling stuff, as enthusiastically practiced by the pharaoh Queen Hatshepsut. She wound up on the throne after promoting herself from regent and is best known for launching a trading expedition to the land of Punt at the base of the Red Sea, as well as re-establishing trade routes with the Near East. All that incoming wealth financed one of the biggest building programs in Egyptian history, with Hatshepsut embellishing existing temples like the one at Karnak, as well as making brand new structures like her triple colonnaded mortuary temple. This was a more efficient alternative to single-use pyramids because they were way the hell smaller, but also served as a site of public worship for the pharaoh after death, while they themselves took a nice long nap in the Valley of the Kings. This didn't stop the tombs from being robbed, but well, Neither did the pyramids, so why waste the effort? Back in the
Yeah.
land of the living, Hatshepsut's stepson Tutmosis III went on campaign after campaign after campaign to extend Egypt's
Bro was a hungry boy for land.
dominion from down in Nubia all the way up to Syria. The kingdom became so fabulously wealthy that a Babylonian king once told Amenhotep III, "In your country, gold is like dust." While the pharaohs of the 18th dynasty were having a grand old time, they weren't the only ones with resources and power. See, after the expulsion of the Hyksos, the cult of the god Amun gained immense prestige as thanks for his help liberating Egypt, and he fused with the primary sun god to become Amun-Ra, the patron god of all Egypt. With that kind of clout, the priesthood of Amun's power rivaled only the pharaoh. There was one king who saw this process unfolding and tried to stop it, but he went just a smidge overboard with it. Amenhotep IV completely banned the worship of Amun-Ra, made a new capital away from Thebes in the Temple of Amun at Karnak, and promoted a new cult worshipping the sun disk Aten, with whom only
God, what is happening here?
the pharaoh could commune, thus granting the renamed Akhenaten sole power, pun intended, over his newly diet monotheistic state. Unfortunately, his first and only act as autocrat was kind of nothing, so nobody was governing and the economy fell in the tank, and when the new pharaoh Tutankhamun undid all that Aten nonsense and got things back on track, everybody was relieved, especially the priesthood of Amun. But before that ominous plotline comes to a head, there's one more monarch on the list who puts all the rest to shame, and that is Ramses II. Coming in strong with stable governance, renewed trade, plenty of building, and surprisingly robust international relations, the man did a lot with his 7 decades in power. He launched several
7 decades? That's a long ass time. Damn.
campaigns into the Levant to consolidate his holdings and fend off the Anatolian Hittite Empire.
When did he inherit the throne? Like, cause, I mean, let's say he inherits it at 10. He's living into his 80s. What?
And while his military operations were moderately successful, his military propaganda was outstanding. Ramses returned from the Battle of Kadesh proclaiming the greatest victory in Egyptian history with monuments dedicated to his glory, but the actual battle was basically a draw, and he didn't even take the city of Kadesh. He did, however, end up striking a formal peace treaty with the Hittites, which allowed him to turn his focus inward and get to building. Between a new capital in the Nile Delta, a gigantic mortuary temple in Thebes, and a complex way up the river in Nubia, Ramses shelled out on monuments all along the Nile like nobody could even dream, transforming the entire face of Egypt. Lucky timing that he got to it when he did, because in a half century, it all falls apart.
Oh.
Yeah, unfortunately for Ramses III, the crises were frequent and numerous. First were the invasions, or possibly just migrations, of various peoples from the northern Mediterranean, whom he begrudgingly allowed to settle in Sinai and the Levant. Meanwhile, overseas trade dried up because all the other civilizations of the late Bronze Age were in the process of collapsing, and all that fighting left the treasury low on funds, so the tomb builders went on strike. They did come back, but the fact that Ramses' main temple complex had defensive fortifications was a very bad sign. And to cap it off, a conflict between potential heirs ended with Ramses getting assassinated by his great wife. Well, one of them.
Polygamy was typical, with a great royal wife designated as the one whose kid becomes next king. Ramses III stupidly had 2 great royal wives, which invited a succession crisis. God, he is stupid.
That was partly the issue. After that, subsequent rulers were no match for persistent droughts, nor the priesthood of Amun, who were now fully in charge of Upper Egypt from their base in Thebes and taking on royal titles to fit their newfound stature. There was still an actual pharaoh down in the Delta, but crazy coincidence, he was
An Egyptian heart hieratic scale communicated power via relative size. The king on the right appears as tall as the priest on the left, but look closely, the king is standing on a box in order to be level with the priest. The king is no longer in charge. Ooh! Ooh, I love that.
was related to the high priest. So silly. The breakdown of central authority in the Third Intermediate Period wasn't that bad of a time on its own, but it left Egypt wide open to foreign rule, as Libyans who settled in the Delta in centuries prior wound up ruling for 2.5 dynasties. The kingdom intermittently came together before falling back apart, and this tempting opportunity caught the eye of the Nubians from the Kingdom of Kush. On paper, once again not great, because after King Kashta installed his daughter as chief priestess of Amun, his son King Pi conquered the whole of Egypt and established a new dynasty of Kushite rulers. Things thing is, these guys had a long relationship with Egypt and actually really admired their civilization, so although Egypt was ruled by foreigners, they governed well, built more pyramids, and preserved the culture, amounting
Hell yeah, more pyramids. Let's fucking go. The most important thing.
to probably the best century Egypt has had since the New Kingdom. Unfortunately, other conquerors were on the way, as
Oh,
when
man.
the Assyrian Empire marched out from Mesopotamia into the Nile Delta in the 660s BC to sack Memphis and Thebes before installing a puppet dynasty and calling it a day. The Kushites withdrew back to their homeland up the river, leaving Egypt to figure itself out. Despite some success in resisting Assyrian influence, Egypt would remain at the mercy of forces far beyond their control. Later that century, the Assyrians got conquered by the Babylonians, who became the threat du jour, but then they got yoinked by the Achaemenid Persian Empire, who then also conquered Egypt and actually kept it this time. Egypt was no stranger to rule by foreigners, but this was the first time that the Kingdom of the Nile was merely a distant corner of a much larger empire. Granted, this was the Persian Empire.
Literally, all you have to do is pay the taxes and then you can do whatever you want. We are an empire, not monster. Hold up now. Empire, in my mind, is synonymous with monster.
So they were actually cool with Egyptian culture, but it's the principle of the thing, you know? So naturally, Egyptians tried their hand at breaking free, and with help from Greek mercenaries, they snuck in a little half-century of independence. Persia did eventually come back, but they wouldn't stay for long, because Alexander, the Macedonian twink, came on in to build an
I was not expecting that. I was not expecting Macedonian twink. I was expecting like something along the line of like Alexander the quite all right. Alexander the Macedonian.
an even bigger empire. But he died, like,
Rip.
really fast. So in 323, his general Ptolemy snagged a piece of the shattering Macedonian Empire and became the new pharaoh of Egypt. His Ptolemaic dynasty had its share of ups and downs and catastrophic inbreeding, but it honestly did pretty well for itself, as the coastal capital of Alexandria became the pinnacle of Hellenistic culture. Although the ruling class was almost exclusively Greek, they respected Egyptian culture, honored their gods, and issued royal decrees in both languages, which is why we have documents like the Rosetta Stone. The golden glow of Ptolemaic Egypt reached as far as Rome, who admired the culture, yes, but also realized that an agricultural powerhouse like the Nile would fit perfectly into their growing empire. So even with a valiant last huzzah by Queen Cleopatra, Egypt became a province of Rome. Despite this rather substantial political change, the biggest shock to Egyptian culture came 3 centuries later with the spread of Christianity. Much more severe than the reforms of Akhenaten, Egyptian pagan
We are really going far into Egyptian history. I didn't think we'd get this far.
temples were converted into churches or abandoned outright, and the rise of Coptic as the main written language made hieroglyphs obsolete. More than 2 centuries before the Muslim conquest in 641, the Egypt of the pharaohs was gone, conquered not by a man, but a god. And with our 3,500 year chronology completed, that's a wrap on the history of ancient Egypt. It's astounding that even with dynasties worth of growth and change and turmoil, the core of that culture held steady and their civilization always came back stronger. Still, despite the mountains of evidence we found with modern archaeology, there's a fundamental mysteriousness to all that grandeur that somehow makes it even more fascinating. As the more we learn, the more we want to learn. Ugh, stupid learning.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I tell you, this whole thing is just one big pyramid scheme.
He'd been waiting for that one.
Oh, God.
He'd been wanting to use that one for a while. And that was History Re-Summarized Egypt by Overly Sarcastic Productions. This was a really good episode from Blue. One of his better ones, I would say. For sure, this one was really entertaining. Really well written, well paced, all around, great job. I have nothing to add here at the end. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.